Hello, lovers of tales and stories. Welcome to another narrative that will warm your hearts. Today, we will dive into a story of love, mystery, and secrets, and the best style of the Korean dramas we love so much. A story about an unexpected marriage, a hidden identity, and a love that blossoms in the most unlikely places. Have you settled in? Then, prepare to fall in love with CL Ji-hae and the enigmatic Lee Jin-wook. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share this story with your friends. Now, tell me, from which city are you watching us? Let's begin. The contract that bound our hearts. Our story begins in a picturesque neighborhood of Seoul, where the modernity of skyscrapers meets the tranquility of tree-lined streets. There, in a small and charming clinic called Animal Hug, veterinarian So Ji-hae, played by the sweet and charismatic Park Min-young, found her life's purpose. Her days were a symphony of barks, meows, and the occasional chirp of a rescued bird. For Ji-hae, every animal that entered through that door was a life to be saved, a heart to be comforted. Her own life was simple, almost monastic. She divided her time between the clinic and the small apartment she shared with her best friend and partner, the extroverted and loyal Kim Yoo-jung. Ji-hae was a dreamer. She believed in fated encounters and gazes that meet across a crowd, and a love built with patience and sincerity. What she didn't know was that fate, with its ironic sense of humor, was about to hand her a love story that would challenge all her beliefs, starting with the most unusual of invitations, a blind date for her golden retriever, Maru. The proposal, coming from a mysterious client, made her laugh, but curiosity spoke louder. It would be a fun anecdote to tell Yoo-jung later. Little did she know that this trivial decision was the first domino piece that would lead her to a future of luxury, secrets, and an overwhelming passion.
The next day, the setting was that of a classic K-drama. A sophisticated cafe at the top of a skyscraper, with floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a breathtaking view of the Han River. Ji-hae, feeling a little out of place in her simple dress, awaited her dog's supposed suitor. That's when he arrived. Lee Jin-wook, played by the talented and enigmatic Ji Chang-wook, was the definition of perfection. A tailored suit, impeccable hair, an expensive watch on his wrist, and a gaze that seemed to read the soul. He sat down and, with an economy of words that bordered on coldness, got straight to the point. Lee Jin-wook, office worker, stable salary. I'm looking for a wife. Ji-hae blinked, confused. I'm sorry, I think there's been a mistake. I came for my dog's date. An almost imperceptible smile played on Jin-wook's lips. There was no mistake, So Ji-hae. The date is for us. He then laid out his proposal, with the same naturalness as someone discussing the weather. A marriage of convenience, quick, practical, without the complications of love. If you agree, we can register our marriage today. Ji-hae's mind was spinning. It was absurd, insane. But then, the image of her sister Yoon-ah came to her mind. Yoon-ah, trapped in an unhappy marriage, suffering at the hands of a cruel husband. The concern for her sister, added to her own college debts, formed a lump in her throat. This marriage, as bizarre as it was, could be the solution. A lifeline. With a trembling voice, she whispered a yes. A contract was signed on a paper napkin, sealing the fate of two strangers with the promise of an uncertain future. Ji-hae's married life began in a deafening silence. Jin-wook's apartment was, in fact, a spectacular penthouse in Gangnam, a palace of glass and steel with a 360-degree view of Seoul. But inside, it was a mausoleum. Designer furniture covered in white sheets, untouched moving boxes in the corners, and a total absence of life. Jin-wook was a ghost in his own home. He would leave before the sun rose and return long after Ji-hae had fallen asleep. The only communication between them were notes left on the refrigerator and a credit card with an astronomical limit, accompanied by a note for household expenses. Ji-hae felt a chill. What kind of office worker lived like this? In the first few days, loneliness was her only companion. But Ji-hae's resilience was her greatest strength. She decided that if this was her new reality, she would transform it. She began to unpack the boxes, to discover the hidden treasures. She filled the apartment with flowers, her favorites, peonies. She created a reading corner with a comfortable armchair and a pile of books. Slowly, the cold palace began to gain the warmth of a home. But a mystery remained. Jin-wook's room. A dark wooden door, impenetrable, that only opened with his fingerprint. What was he hiding in there? Who was the man she had married? A visit to her sister Yuna's house served as a brutal reminder of the dangers of marriage. Choi Tae-jun, her brother-in-law, greeted her with a fake smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. During dinner, he humiliated Yuna in front of Ji-hae, criticizing her food, her clothes, her very existence. "You should be grateful that I support you," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "A divorced woman with a child is worthless." Ji-hae clenched her fists under the table, anger burning in her chest. She saw the light in her sister's eyes fade, replaced by a painful resignation. That night, upon returning to the silent penthouse, Ji-hae looked out at the vastness of Seoul's lights and made a promise to herself. She would use the security that this sham marriage provided her to become stronger, to become the safe harbor her sister desperately needed. The contract with Jin-wook was no longer just about her. It was about Yuna's liberation. The dynamic between Ji-hae and Jin-wook began to change, not through words, but through small acts. One night, Ji-hae, battling a bad flu, fainted in the kitchen. She woke up in her bed, with a cold compress on her forehead and a note on the bedside table. "Soup in the fridge. Rest." He had taken care of her. On another occasion, she found him in the living room in the middle of the night, watching a documentary about penguins. She sat at the other end of the sofa, and they watched in silence for almost an hour. When the documentary ended, he turned to her and said, "They are loyal. They stay with the same partner for life." It was the first time he had shared something personal. Ji-hae began to realize that Jin-wook's coldness was an armor. Underneath, there was a man who longed for connection, who watched, who cared in his own silent way. And, to her astonishment, her heart began to betray her, beating a little faster whenever he was near. The fragile bubble of tranquility they lived in was brutally burst. One afternoon, while watering her beloved peonies on the balcony, her cell phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. When she opened it, her world collapsed. Photos. Photos of her, in a hotel room, with torn clothes, unconscious. Beside her, the silhouette of a man. The message below was a knife to her heart. Does the great Lee Jin-wook know he married a second-hand woman? The sender, she knew instinctively, was her brother-in-law. The air left her lungs. Fragments of a forgotten nightmare assaulted her. The smell of alcohol, the feeling of being dragged, a scream trapped in her throat. It was the trauma from 4 years ago, the event her mind had blocked to protect her. She fell to her knees, tears blinding her. That was how Jin-wook found her. Upon seeing the photos, fury transformed his face into a granite mask. He wrapped her in his arms, his body trembling with rage. "I will kill him," he growled. "But first, I will find out every sordid detail of this story. And you will not go through this alone. I am here." Jin-wook's promise was that of a man who moves the world. In less than 24 hours, the truth was in his hands, in a detailed report that made him want to destroy everything around him. Choi Tae-jun, to pay off gambling debts, had planned the unthinkable. to drug and hand over his own sister-in-law to one of his creditors. The sordid plan only failed because the drunk hotel employee got the room number wrong. Ji-hye was left in another man's room, a man who, unlike the predator who awaited her, saw her, protected her, and saved her. And the final revelation hit Jin-wook like a lightning bolt. He remembered that night. The business trip, the feeling that something was wrong, the vulnerable woman in his bed. He was the man. Fate, in its complex and often cruel web, had connected them years before, on a night of horror and salvation, only to reunite them under the pretext of a contract. The irony was overwhelming. The stage for the climax of the farce was the Gu Group's annual ball, the most important social event in Korea. Ji-hye, still shaken but determined not to hide, went to the event with Yoo-jung. She needed a distraction. That's when the master of ceremonies announced the arrival of the host. With a round of applause, let's welcome the chairman of the Gu Group, the man who leads our economy into the future, Mr. Lee Jin-wook. Time stood still. The man who walked onto the stage, the tycoon revered by all, the reclusive billionaire who graced the covers of business magazines, was her husband. The shock was so intense that Ji-hye felt the floor disappear from under her feet. Every note, every silent dinner, every gesture of care was recontextualized in the blinding light of the lie. She was not his wife. She was a disguise, a piece in his power game. The humiliation was public and devastating. With her heart in tatters, Ji-hye fled. She left behind the luxury, the secrets, the man she thought she knew. She found shelter in Yoo-jung's apartment, her only safe haven. For days, she refused to eat, to speak, to live. The pain of betrayal was a poison that spread through her veins. Jin-wook, for his part, experienced a desperation that no business crisis had ever caused him. He called, sent messages, sent flowers that withered in the hallway. He was a king in his empire, but a beggar at the gates of her heart. It was his grandmother, the matriarch of the Gu Group, a woman of few words and much wisdom, who gave him the only advice that mattered. "You won her with a lie, grandson. Now, win her back with the truth, the raw, naked truth of your heart." And he listened to her. On a night when Seoul was being punished by a storm, Jin-wook waited for her. When Ji-hye finally came out, he was there, a dark silhouette against the curtain of rain. And then, he did the unthinkable. The man who commanded an empire, who made nations tremble, knelt. On the cold, wet sidewalk, Lee Jin-wook knelt before the woman he loved. With a broken voice, he confessed everything. The betrayal he had suffered years ago that had made him cynical about love. The fear that his fortune would intimidate her. The desperate love he had felt for her from the moment their eyes met in that cafe. The false identity, he admitted, was a cowardly act of a man who did not know how to love. "I love you, So Ji-hye," he shouted to be heard above the storm. "I love you more than my empire, more than my name, more than myself. Please, forgive me. Give me a chance to be the man you deserve." Ji-hye's tears, hot and salty, mixed with the cold rain. She looked at the man before her, soaked, vulnerable, his heart exposed. And she didn't see the billionaire. She saw Jin-wook. The man who had covered her while she slept, who had protected her from her nightmares, who was now on his knees for her. With a sob, she pulled him up and, in a gesture that defied the storm and the world, she kissed him. A kiss of forgiveness, of renewal, of a love that had been forged in the fire of adversity. The contract, a forgotten piece of paper, was replaced by a silent promise of a shared future based on truth. Hand in hand, they walked away from the rain, walking towards a new dawn, no longer as parts of an agreement, but as soulmates who had finally found their way back home. And so, the story of So Ji-hye and Lee Jin-wook teaches us that true love can be born from the most unexpected circumstances. That trust, once broken, can be rebuilt with honesty and forgiveness. And that, in the end, the heart always finds its way back home. What did you think of this story? Leave your opinion in the comments. And don't forget to follow us for more tales and stories. Until next time.